Ladies and gentlemen, if you've ever cried, pleaded, explained yourself, or poured your heart out to an avoidant and watched them stay cold, you already know the pain of feeling invisible while you're trying your hardest to be seen. And that is exactly why this first truth is so powerful. Ignoring them hits harder than crying ever did. Not because your tears don't matter, not because your feelings aren't real, but because tears still keep you in the role they are most comfortable with, the role of the pursuer. When you cry, you are still emotionally available. When you argue, you are still engaged. When you send the long paragraph, you are still giving them attention, energy, access. And for an avoidant, access is safety. Access means they can keep you close without having to fully show up. Crying, as heartbreaking as it is, often confirms something inside their nervous system. They still care, they're still here, I still matter, I still have influence. Even if they don't admit it, even if they act annoyed or distant, your emotional reaction proves you're still invested. It proves the connection is still alive, because your heart is still trying. And that's why avoidants can sometimes tolerate your emotions. They may not know how to respond, they may shut down, they may withdraw, but on a deeper level your reaction keeps the pattern intact. You chase, they control the distance. You reach, they decide when to respond. Your tears don't remove their comfort zone, they actually keep it stable, because the dynamic stays predictable. Now, ignoring them is different. Ignoring them is not a louder cry. Ignoring them is not a stronger argument. Ignoring them is the sudden removal of the very thing that soothed their system, your predictability. It's the moment you stop feeding the connection with your attention. It's the moment you stop showing them that they can affect you whenever they want. And that is why ignoring them hits like a psychological shock, because it takes away the one tool avoidants use to feel safe control. Avoidants often survive relationships by managing closeness. They pull back when they feel pressure, they go quiet when emotions rise, they keep things vague when commitment is near. Not because they're evil, but because their nervous system learned that closeness can lead to pain. So they create distance, and that distance becomes their comfort. But they also want to feel chosen. They want to feel desired. They want to feel like they matter, without being trapped by intimacy. And the way they get that is through your pursuit, your emotional availability, your constant effort. It becomes proof to them that the connection is still there, even when they are not showing up properly. So when you ignore them, you remove the proof. You remove the emotional supply. You remove the confirmation that they can step back and still keep you orbiting. And suddenly, their internal balance collapses, because they are used to being the one who decides when the conversation starts, when it ends, when the affection returns, when the distance is okay. They are used to you caring out loud. They are used to you reaching first. They are used to you being the one who breaks the silence. And when you don't, something flips. They begin to feel uncertainty. They begin to wonder. They begin to scan. Why aren't they texting? Why aren't they reacting? Are they done? Did I lose them? That uncertainty is not comfortable for an avoidant, because uncertainty means loss of control, and loss of control activates their deepest fear, being rejected first. Yes, avoidants fear intimacy, but they also fear abandonment. They just protect themselves by pulling away before they can be left. They leave emotionally so they don't have to feel left physically. Your ignoring disrupts that defense. Because now you're the one creating distance. You're the one stepping back. You're the one controlling access. And that is why it hits harder than tears, because tears put the power in their hands, but silence puts it back in yours. And let's be honest, many avoidants are not moved by tears in the moment, because tears feel like pressure. Tears feel like demands. Tears feel like emotional responsibility. So they shut down, they detach, they minimize, they avoid. But silence doesn't demand anything. Silence doesn't accuse. Silence doesn't ask them to explain. Silence simply changes the reality. It says, I'm not available for this dynamic anymore. And reality is the one thing an avoidant cannot debate. That's why ignoring them can create panic. And that panic is not always love. It's the nervous system reacting to a broken pattern. They were comfortable when you were emotional, because they could label you as too much and feel justified in distancing. But when you are quiet and calm, there's nothing to label. There's nothing to blame. There's just the empty space where your attention used to be. And that empty space forces them to confront something they've been avoiding: consequences. Ladies and gentlemen, this is not about punishing anyone. This is about understanding power. If someone only values you when you withdraw, that tells you the relationship was built on access, not respect. And the reason ignoring them hits so hard is because it exposes what was truly running the connection, not love, but control. When your tears kept you available, the system stayed the same. When your silence removed access, the system was forced to respond. They expected you to reach out, because that was the pattern you unknowingly trained them to rely on. Not because you were weak, not because you were foolish, but because you were loving, consistent, emotionally present. And you believed that if you showed enough care, enough patience, enough understanding, the relationship would eventually become safe. And for a while, it probably felt like it worked, because every time the connection got shaky, you were the one who stabilized it. Every time the tension rose, you softened it. Every time they pulled away, you pulled the relationship back together with your effort. That becomes a rhythm. And once a rhythm becomes normal, the avoidant starts expecting it the way someone expects the sun to rise. So let's name the pattern clearly. You text, they delay. You ask, they dodge. You bring up feelings, they get cold. You try to define the relationship. They say they're not sure. You sense distance, so you work harder. You become nicer, more understanding, more patient, because you don't want to push them away. And the more you adjust to their avoidance, the more power avoidance gains in the relationship. You start thinking your needs are the problem, so you shrink them. You start thinking your emotions are too heavy, so you swallow them. You start thinking your boundaries will make them leave, so you loosen them. And without realizing it, you become the one carrying the connection while they stay in the safe seat. The seat where they get closeness when they want it and distance when they need it. That's why they expected you to chase, because chasing kept them comfortable. Chasing kept them unchallenged. Chasing allowed them to avoid doing the one thing they fear most, showing up consistently and emotionally. Now, the moment you broke the pattern is not always dramatic. It's usually quiet. It's the day you didn't reply right away. It's the moment you saw the message and chose not to jump. It's the week you stopped asking, "Are we okay?" It's the night you went to sleep without sending the follow-up text. It's the morning you decided, if someone wants me, they will meet me. That moment might look small from the outside, but psychologically it's huge, because you're not just changing behavior, you're changing the rules of the game. And when you change the rules, the nervous system panics. Avoidants often feel safest when they can predict the emotional environment. They may not like intense closeness, but they do like predictable access. They like knowing they can return when they feel like it. They like knowing you'll still be open. They like knowing you'll still be there to receive them. So when you stop doing what you always did, you create something they hate: uncertainty. Uncertainty feels like risk. Uncertainty feels like loss of control. And loss of control feels like the beginning of abandonment, which is the wound they pretend they don't have. This is why they start spiraling, not immediately with love, but with mental noise. They begin checking their phone more. They open the chat just to look. They reread the last messages. They look for signs. They become hyper-aware of your absence. And that hyper-awareness is the first clue that you mattered more than they admitted. Because when someone truly doesn't care, they don't notice silence, they don't track it, they don't feel threatened by it. The fact that your absence becomes loud in their mind proves that the old pattern was doing something for them. It was giving them emotional regulation. It was giving them certainty. It was giving them the comfort of being pursued. Now here comes the most important shift. Once you break the pattern, the avoidance brain starts trying to restore it. They don't always do it with sincerity. They do it with testing. A little message, a casual reach out, a reaction to your story. Something small enough to protect their ego, but strong enough to see if your door is still open. And this is where most people accidentally rebuild the old pattern with one quick reply. Because the avoidant is not asking, "Are we healed?" They are asking, "Do I still have access?" And if you give them instant access, you teach them that nothing changed. You teach them that your silence was temporary. You teach them that they can wait you out. You teach them that your boundaries melt the moment they appear. The pattern restarts, and you end up right back where you began, confused, overthinking, doing all the work again. But if you hold your ground, something different happens. The avoidant has to face a new reality. Your attention is no longer automatic. Your availability is no longer guaranteed. Your emotional labor is no longer free. And that forces a decision. Either they rise into real effort, real consistency, real accountability, or they retreat, because they were never looking for a relationship that required them to grow. They were looking for comfort without responsibility. Ladies and gentlemen, the moment you broke the pattern was the moment you stopped being predictable, and predictable is what kept them comfortable. When you stopped reacting, you became the one thing they can't manage, a person with self-respect. And self-respect is disruptive, because it doesn't argue, it doesn't beg, it doesn't chase. It simply changes the outcome. The gap is what turns your silence into a magnet, because the gap is where their mind loses certainty and starts chasing answers. You have to understand this: obsession isn't always love. Obsession is often the brain trying to solve a problem it can't control. When you used to reply quickly, when you used to react emotionally, when you used to show them your feelings on your sleeve, they didn't have to wonder where they stood. They could pull away and still feel powerful because your behavior confirmed that they still mattered. Your attention was predictable. Your care was consistent. Your presence was almost guaranteed. And as long as they had that guarantee, they could stay avoidant without risk. But the moment you went quiet, the guarantee disappeared. That's the gap. The gap is the space between what they expected you to do and what you actually did. They expected you to chase, you didn't. They expected you to be emotional, you became calm. They expected you to fold, you stayed still. And that gap creates psychological discomfort, because their mind can't settle the story. It can't file you under, still available. It can't relax into the comfort of knowing you'll always be there. It can't manage the distance like it used to. So their brain starts working overtime. They replay conversations. They reread messages. They scan your tone. They search for a reason. They ask themselves, did I go too far? Are they done? Did they move on? Are they ignoring me on purpose? And the more they ask, the more your absence becomes loud in their system. That's the power of the gap. It forces attention. It forces focus. It forces them to feel the consequences of not showing up, not because you screamed, but because you stopped feeding the pattern. This is why your silence is more disruptive than any argument, because arguments still create connection. Even anger is still engagement. Even begging is still energy. Even crying is still proof that they have access to your emotional world. And an avoidant can tolerate your emotions while still staying distant because your emotions keep them in control. They can say, you're too much, and step away. They can label you dramatic and feel justified. They can use your reaction as a reason to stay guarded. But silence gives them nothing to use. Silence removes the storyline where they are the calm one and you are the needy one. Silence removes the theater. Silence removes the excuse. All that remains is the empty space where your attention used to be. And in that empty space, their mind begins to spiral, because now they have to face a reality they hate. They cannot control your closeness anymore. The gap also activates something deeper in avoidance, the fear of being left first. People think avoidants don't care about abandonment, but that's not true. Avoidants fear abandonment too, they just handle it differently. They don't cling, they detach. They don't beg, they retreat. They don't say, please don't leave. They act like they didn't care. Because acting like you don't care is protection, it's a shield. It's how they keep their pride intact. It's how they avoid feeling vulnerable. So when you create the gap, you activate that shield. And their brain tries to fix the discomfort quickly. That's where the obsession behavior begins. They start checking your social media. They start watching your stories. They start paying attention to your online presence. They notice if you're active. They notice if you posted. They notice if you look happy. Because they're trying to answer one question without asking it directly. And they will often try to get that answer in indirect ways, because direct vulnerability feels like danger. That's why breadcrumbs happen. A random question. A meme. A like. A reaction. A casual reach out pretending nothing happened. It's not necessarily romance. It's not necessarily commitment. It's them poking the gap to see if it closes. It's them testing if your silence is real. It's them trying to restore certainty without offering accountability. And this is the moment where your power either grows or collapses. If you respond instantly, emotionally, warmly, you close the gap for them. Their nervous system relaxes. Their anxiety drops. They feel safe again, not because they're healed, but because they regained access. And once they regain access, the obsession fades, because the obsession was never about love, it was about uncertainty. But if you stay grounded, if you stay calm, if you move slow, if you don't reward crumbs with full access, the gap stays open. And when the gap stays open, their mind has to sit in the discomfort. They have to face the possibility that the old dynamic is dead. They have to face the possibility that you are no longer waiting. They have to face the possibility that they can lose you. Ladies and gentlemen, that's why the gap creates obsession. It's the mind's attempt to restore control. It's the nervous system's attempt to regain certainty. And if you hold your silence with dignity, that obsession either forces them to step up into real effort, or it reveals that they never had the capacity to love you properly. Either way, the gap becomes your truth. It becomes the clearest answer you will ever get, not from their words, but from their behavior under pressure. Avoidants don't respond to your presence the way you think they should, and that's the part that breaks people. You show up with love and you expect love to soften them. You offer patience and you expect patience to make them safe. You communicate and you expect communication to create closeness. But an avoidance nervous system often interprets closeness as pressure, and pressure triggers distance. So while you are right there, while you are available, while you are reaching, the avoidant is not fully feeling the relationship. They are managing it. They are managing how close it's getting, how intense it feels, how much expectation is in the air, how vulnerable they might be forced to become. And when someone is busy managing, they aren't free to feel. That's why their most intense emotions often appear after you stop. Because when you stop texting, when you stop asking, when you stop reacting, the pressure of connection disappears from their system. The relationship no longer feels like a demand. They don't feel like they have to perform, explain, commit, or be consistent in that moment. Their body relaxes, and once the body relaxes, the emotions they buried begin to rise. It's delayed not because your value is delayed, but because their capacity to feel safely is delayed. In real time, with you present, the avoidant might nitpick you. They might suddenly become confused. They might focus on small flaws. They might act annoyed by your needs. They might say you're asking for too much. They might act like you're the reason they feel trapped. Why? Because their brain is trying to create distance. Their mind starts scanning for reasons to pull away, because finding flaws gives them justification. Justification creates emotional separation, and separation creates relief. That relief is the most misunderstood part of avoidant psychology. When they pull away, they often feel lighter. They feel calm. They feel free. And they mistake that relief for truth. They think maybe I don't love them. They think maybe it's not right. They think maybe I needed space. But what they're really experiencing is their nervous system calming down after running from intimacy. Relief is not clarity. Relief is a temporary nervous system reward for creating distance from what feels threatening. So when you're still there, when you're still trying, your presence keeps activating their closeness alarm. It doesn't mean you're doing something wrong. It means their wiring is sensitive to intimacy. Your love can feel like a spotlight. Your desire for connection can feel like a grip. Your emotional honesty can feel like exposure. So they shut down, and you interpret their shutdown as lack of care, when often it's the opposite. Your importance is exactly what activates their fear. Now here's where your silence becomes the turning point. When you stop reacting, they lose the constant stimulation that made them feel pressured. The relationship is no longer in their face. They're not being asked to respond right now. They're not being confronted with your feelings, your questions, your boundaries, your needs. And in that space, the mind stops defending as aggressively. The system settles, and once it settles, the emotions they avoided start leaking through. This is why many avoidants think about you more after you're gone. They remember your kindness when they're not being asked to reciprocate it. They remember your loyalty when they're not being asked to match it. They remember your presence when they're not being asked to hold it responsibly. It's painful, but it's real. They can finally feel you without the immediate pressure of having to show up correctly, because pressure triggers avoidance, but absence triggers reflection. And reflection is where regret is born. They start replaying the moments you tried. They start seeing the pattern not all at once, but slowly. They start noticing the gap between how much you gave and how little they returned. They start feeling the emptiness where your attention used to be. And that emptiness hits hard because your attention wasn't just attention, it was regulation. It was comfort. It was a reassurance that they were wanted even when they were inconsistent. When that reassurance disappears, their system begins to feel unstable. So now instead of relief, they begin to feel something else: loss. Not necessarily romantic love right away, but loss of access, loss of control, loss of certainty. And once loss begins, emotions intensify. The mind fights it at first. They rationalize, they blame, they minimize, they tell themselves you're the problem. Because admitting loss means admitting responsibility, and responsibility is terrifying to someone who has survived by detaching. But silence keeps doing its work. Silence doesn't plead. Silence just stands there unchanged, and that stability becomes the mirror they can't escape. Because now they can't use your reactions as excuses. They can't say you're too emotional if you're calm. They can't say you're needy if you're not chasing. They can't say you're demanding if you're simply unavailable to inconsistency. Ladies and gentlemen, this is why avoidants often feel it after you stop. In the relationship, they manage closeness to feel safe. After the relationship quiets down, they finally feel what they suppressed. Your absence becomes the first environment where their emotions are allowed to surface without triggering immediate panic. And the cruel truth is, the more you chase while you're present, the more they resist. But the more you become calm and unavailable, the more reality has space to reach them. If you want to understand the avoidant comeback, you have to stop romanticizing it. Because most comebacks do not start with love, they start with anxiety. They start with the nervous system feeling a loss of access. They start with the ego realizing it no longer has control. They start with that uncomfortable question they can't silence. What if I actually lost them? And because avoidants are allergic to full vulnerability, they don't return with their chest open. They return with one hand on the door and one hand protecting their pride. So it comes as something small. A "Hey, you good?" A reaction to your story. A random question. A message that pretends nothing happened. And when you've been starving for clarity, starving for effort, starving to feel chosen, that little message feels like water in a desert. Your heart jumps, your mind races, your body floods with hope. You start imagining the apology, the reunion, that this time it will be different. And that is exactly the trap, because the avoidant's first reach out is often not a commitment. It's a temperature check. It's not, "I'm ready to love you properly." It's, "Do I still have access to you?" Why do they do it this way? Because direct accountability feels like danger to them. Saying, "I hurt you," means facing shame. Saying, "I miss you," means exposing need. Saying, "I was wrong," means risking rejection. So they take the safer route. They send a breadcrumb. A breadcrumb gives them information without vulnerability. It tells them whether you're still emotionally available, whether your boundary is real, whether the old dynamic can be restored. If you respond quickly, warmly, eagerly, you give them the answer they were looking for. "Yes, I still have you." And the moment they get that answer, something happens inside them that most people don't see. Their anxiety drops. Their nervous system relaxes. The uncertainty that was bothering them disappears. They feel safe again, not because they changed, but because they regained control of the connection. They regained the comfort of knowing they can step in and you will step toward them. They regained the old power position where they can be inconsistent and still be desired. That's why the one mistake that destroys your power instantly is responding to a breadcrumb like it's a breakthrough. Because when you do that, you reward minimal effort with maximum access. You teach them. You don't have to repair. You don't have to explain. You don't have to be consistent. You just have to reappear. And if someone learns they can keep you with crumbs, they will never bring a meal. They will keep feeding you just enough to keep you attached, just enough to keep you hoping, just enough to keep you available, while they avoid the deeper work of real intimacy. So the avoidant pulls back again, not always immediately, but soon. Because the reach out was not about rebuilding, it was about regulating. It was their nervous system grabbing comfort. And once they feel comfort again, the urgency fades. The missing you feeling that pushed them to message you goes quiet, because the fear of losing you has been soothed. And then you're left confused all over again, asking yourself why they came back just to disappear. This is why you must learn to distinguish between a test and a return. A test is casual, vague, low effort, and designed to get a reaction. A return is clear, accountable, consistent, and designed to repair. A test says, "Hey." A return says, "I know I hurt you and I want to talk about it." A test ignores the past. A return acknowledges the impact. A test wants access without responsibility. A return offers effort with humility. And here is the painful part, ladies and gentlemen. An avoidant will often keep testing as long as it works. They will come in and out because the door is open. They will keep you in limbo because limbo protects them from commitment while still giving them connection. They will treat you like a light switch, on when they want warmth, off when they want space. And if you don't have a standard, you will call that love and slowly lose yourself trying to earn consistency from someone who is built to avoid it. So what do you do instead? You don't become cruel. You don't become heartless. You become grounded. You respond with calm, not with hunger. You respond with clarity, not with emotional flooding. You observe whether their behavior changes, not whether their words sound sweet. Because the real question is not, did they text me? The real question is, did they come back correctly? Do they take responsibility without you demanding it? Do they show up consistently after the first message? Do they make space for your feelings instead of avoiding them? Do they repair what they damaged, or do they try to reset like nothing happened? Ladies and gentlemen, this is how you protect your power. You stop treating a breadcrumb like a miracle. You stop letting A erase months of confusion. You stop falling for the comfort of contact when what you truly need is character. Because a real return will not be offended by your standards. A real return will rise to meet them. Silence becomes a filter the moment you stop using it to get a reaction and start using it to protect your reality. Most people go quiet while still emotionally begging inside. They stop texting but keep checking their phone. They stop calling but keep stalking stories. They stop chasing but keep rehearsing what they'd say if the avoidant came back. That is not silence, that is waiting. That is not power, that is withdrawal. Real silence is different. Real silence is when you're not trying to control the outcome, you're trying to control your standards. And when your silence is rooted in standards, it becomes the sharpest filter in your life, because it reveals who is capable of loving you properly and who only wants access when it's convenient. A filter works by removing what doesn't match. Silence does the same thing. When you stop offering constant availability, you stop offering emotional labor on demand, you stop offering explanations to someone committed to misunderstanding you, you remove the comfort zone that allowed the avoidant to stay inconsistent. And once that comfort zone is gone, what remains is the truth. Not the truth they speak, the truth they live. Not the promises, the patterns, not the words, the consistency. Because while you were always there, you made it easy for them to stay halfway. They could pull back and still keep you. They could go cold and still receive warmth. They could vanish and still return without repair. Your presence was a cushion, and cushions make people lazy. Not necessarily cruel, but lazy. When consequences don't exist, growth doesn't happen. When access is guaranteed, effort becomes optional. Silence removes the guarantee, and once the guarantee is removed, the avoidant has to face a choice. If they truly value you, they will rise. If they only value what you provide, they will test. If they are not ready for intimacy, they will blame. Silence forces their real motivation to come forward, because if the only reason someone stays connected is because you keep reaching, then they were never committed to connection, they were committed to comfort. And silence is the first environment where comfort isn't free. That's why you'll notice two kinds of reactions when you go quiet. One reaction is the breadcrumb, a casual message, a like, a random question. They want to see if they can still access you. They want to see if the old dynamic is still alive. They want reassurance without accountability. This reaction tells you something. They miss the benefits of you, but they are not offering the responsibility of you. They want the warmth without the work. They want the closeness without the courage. The second reaction is real effort. Real effort has weight. Real effort is consistent. Real effort doesn't vanish after one reply. Real effort doesn't pretend nothing happened. Real effort acknowledges the distance, acknowledges the impact, acknowledges your feelings, and doesn't punish you for having standards. Real effort says, I know I hurt you and I want to repair. Real effort doesn't rush you into comfort, it respects your pace, it respects your boundaries. It doesn't demand instant forgiveness, it earns trust over time. Silence filters between those two. And here's the truth that is hard but freeing. If your silence makes someone disappear, you didn't lose love, you lost an illusion. You lost someone who was only present when you were easy. You lost someone who benefited from your over-giving. You lost someone who couldn't tolerate a relationship where your needs matter too. And that loss hurts, but it also saves you. It saves you from spending years negotiating basic respect. It saves you from becoming smaller to keep someone comfortable. It saves you from confusing inconsistency with mystery and calling it passion. But silence doesn't only filter them, it filters you. It filters out the version of you that accepts crumbs. It filters out the version of you that confuses attention with devotion. It filters out the version of you that keeps explaining your worth to someone who keeps doubting it. It filters out the version of you that stays in limbo because leaving feels scary. Silence teaches your nervous system a new skill, staying grounded in uncertainty. Most people chase because uncertainty feels unbearable. They text again because the quiet feels like rejection. They check in because waiting feels like losing. But silence trains you to sit in the discomfort without abandoning yourself. It trains you to stop seeking relief from the person who caused the pain. It trains you to realize that peace is not the absence of love. Peace is the presence of self-respect. Ladies and gentlemen, when you master that, you stop being controlled by hope. Hope is beautiful, but hope without standards becomes a prison. Hope makes you tolerate what you shouldn't. Hope makes you accept half love. Hope makes you keep the door open for someone who keeps walking out. Silence with standards breaks that prison. It says, I can love you and still choose me. It says, I can miss you and still protect myself. It says, I am not punishing you, I am honoring me. And that is why silence becomes a filter, because it doesn't beg someone to change, it simply stops rewarding what hurts you. It forces truth to show itself. Either they rise into accountability, consistency, and real repair, or they fade because they only wanted access without responsibility. Either way, your life becomes clearer, your heart becomes stronger, and your standards become your protection.